Let's do analysis on the use case that we have selected, that is manage expert. So remember manage expert. Let's go to the logical view. Let's create a package and name it as analysis model. Let's take it down. Let's create a package under this manage experts, and under this let's create a diagram, a class diagram. Now this class diagram, what we need to do is just bring in the classes that are required for this use case only. So for this use case, what all do we require? Since we have to manage experts, if we look at the manage experts, specify the employees of the company as experts for various subjects. So subject would be required and expert would be required, right? So let's go here. Let's bring in the subject. Let's bring in the expert. Right? Now remember, this whole thing starts with the training manager. So let's bring in, just for reference purpose, this training manager will interact with the system. How? So he has to be provided a user interface. So we require a class for that purpose, and this user interface would be some kind of a GUI, a form. So let's call it as expert form. Similarly, we are interacting, this use case is interacting with the HRMS, yes, and similarly it is interacting with the email system, right? So what we'll do is, again, between this actor and the system, we have provided an expert form to facilitate the interaction. Similarly, we are going to have a class whose only responsibility would be to talk to the HRMS. Similarly, another class whose only responsibility is to talk to the email system. So we don't have this, we have to create this. So let's say HRMS access, and let's say email access. Now, since these three classes facilitate interaction with an actor, they act or they lie on the boundary of the system. So we can stereotype, we can provide additional meaning to this class by saying that these are boundary classes. So we stereotype. So stereotype is a mechanism by which we can provide additional meaning to the existing notations. Some of these stereotypes have their own special icons. Similarly, this would also be a boundary class. This would also be a boundary class. Now, these two are responsible for storing and managing information. They basically represent real world objects. So these we can stereotype them as entity classes representing real world entities. Okay. Now, how many classes we have? 3 plus 2, 5. Right. Now, 5 classes are there. They have to interact with each other to provide value to the actor training manager. In the worst case scenario, each class has to talk to each other class, right? Which means they will all be tightly coupled to each other. So to reduce the coupling, what we'll do is we'll provide a class in the center. and let's call it as expert manager. Now this class, what is its responsibility? Its responsibility is to facilitate communication between these objects. Okay, so this can be stereotyped as control because it controls the overall behavior of the use case. So training manager will interact with the expert form. Expert form can only talk to the expert manager. Expert manager can talk to any of these, right? That means it can talk to boundary classes and entity classes. Okay, so keeping this in mind, let's figure out how these interactions play out in a sequence diagram. And let's name this sequence diagram as add experts. So the whole thing starts off with the training manager. While trying to understand the interaction between the various objects of this use case, let's keep our activity diagram in mind. So chooses to manage expert, the training manager, and he is going to interact with the system in this respect, and the system will display the available option in response. So let's go back to add experts. Training manager is going to interact, right? So now I can choose link or lifeline. I leave it as link, although strictly speaking it should be a lifeline. If I put it as a lifeline, what happens? An instance of training manager gets created, right? Whereas here a link is provided to the training manager in the diagram. So I leave it as link, okay, and the training manager will be interacting with what? Remember, we identified a class whose only responsibility is to interact with facilitate the interaction between the actor and the use case. So expert form. Now what will he say to the expert form? He'll say that he wants to add expert. Okay, now next is what? Let's remove these diagrams which immediately we don't require, the main model and all that. Even the use case view use case diagram we don't need. Now let's go to the activity, display available options. Okay, we have gone to add expert. Okay, so now the moment he says he wants to add experts, display list of subjects. So the expert form has to display a list of subjects. Now does it have it? No. So if it cannot fulfill the responsibility on its own, the only other object it can talk to is the manager. So it will ask the manager. It will ask it for retrieve subject list. Does this expert manager have it? It also doesn't have it. So whom will it ask? It will ask the relevant object. Now in this case, which is the relevant object? Is the subject. So it will ask the subject for the get subject list. Now it is going to return the subject list. Now very important thing here is, if you want to show something being returned, you have to show it as a return, is return, and when you do that, it will show it like this. On this, what you can do is, you can return value, you can say a list. But during analysis, we really don't go into that much of detail, right? So, because especially these return messages, we tend to ignore. Why? Because theoretically, every message has a return message, right? So, which means if there are 50 messages, then you end up with 50 return messages, which doesn't really add any value to our model or to our understanding. So it's better to leave it. So it is understood that the subject list goes back, it comes to the form, and what would the form do? Form will display the subject list. Then what? Then the training manager will select subject. The moment he selects a subject, what should the form do? You have to, or rather the system has to retrieve list of employees for the subject from HRMS. So form can only talk to the manager. So it will ask the manager, retrieve employee list. For what? For the given subject name. Now expert manager itself doesn't have to ask the HRMS. Now HRMS, it can't directly talk to it. So it will talk to the boundary class of the HRMS. So it will ask the HRMS boundary class to get the expert list. And what will it pass? It will pass the subject name. Now this will in turn, this is the boundary class, remember, it also doesn't have it. So it has to ask the HRMS actor. So this will in turn ask the HRMS actor get employee list, subject name. It would be not right to say get expert list. It would be much more appropriate to say employee list, because they're still employees. In the HRMS, they are employees. In our system, once that list comes back, they are still employee list. It's only when they have been added as experts in our system would they be treated as experts. So this will return the employee list, it will return it, and finally the form will display the employee list. They are still employees. Okay. Now if you want to extend the lifeline, just select and pull it down. And it has gone one on top of the other. Okay. So now the training manager has to select. So select. So he will select employee. Now if I want to show that he can do multiple selections, I say is iteration. So naturally a condition is required. So till confirmation. So if you notice here, star means repetition. Till confirmation is the condition. Okay. So now there has to be a confirmation message. So he will confirm his selections. When he confirms the selections, what should the form do? Form will in turn ask the manager to create experts. And what will be the parameter? Employee list, or more appropriately, selected employee list. So for that set of selected employee list, the expert manager has to create. So now where is the expert to create? It's not there. So let's bring in the expert from the domain. So let's drop it here. Okay, let's push this a little bit. Let's push this a little bit. Okay, so the HR will create a subject expert. So create, and what will it pass? The name of the employee, email ID, and the name and the subject, right? Because the expert has to know which are the subjects. Okay, and naturally, which means that reference also has to be stored in the subject. So the subject should know who are all the experts. Add expert, and what will be passed? Expert. Now the status has changed of their both the objects. So which means save and save. Now for a particular expert, selected expert created, now we have to send him a message. So again, the boundary class of the email system has to be brought in, which will in turn talk to the email system actor. So let's minimize this so that we can have a look at a much larger picture. Let's bring this closer. Let's bring this whole thing closer. Okay, toolbox message. Now the HR manager will talk to the email access and say what? Send subject assignments, right? And what will pass? It will pass the expert and the subject, so that the email access can compose a personalized message. Then this would in turn compose a message with the expert and the subject. This would in turn ask the actor to send the message and pass the message as a parameter. So our entire flow is ready. Now we have to make sure that these steps are repeated for all the selected employees. For that we use something called as a fragment, a very powerful feature of UML. Let's push this down. Okay, now we want this to be a loop. Name of the loop is add experts, and condition would be for all selected employees. Okay, let's push this down, now let's select this and make sure that it covers everything that we want repeated. Okay, the things should start from, and finally the control comes back to the form, and the form will display a success message. So display message. So that is the flow in terms of interaction between the various objects for adding an expert. This is a very critical part of analyzing a use case. I think that's enough for today. Let's come back and look at what else to be done during analysis. Bye for now.